Welcome to episode 83 of the Henry George Daily Devotional. We are in chapter 2, How Equal Rights to the Land May Be Asserted and Secured. This is in book 8, which is the application of the remedy. Yes, application of the remedy. Chapter dos. How equal rights to the land may be asserted and secured. Apropos of typing, I had a friend who posted his words per minute of 180 for 30 seconds of typing. 180 words per minute. He is a fast typer. George writes, who knows how quickly he typed this, but it's not about the speed, it's about the truth. We have traced the want and suffering that everywhere prevail among the working classes. The recurring paroxysms, this means of industrial depression, this means recessions, depressions, and war sessions, as I call them. The scarcity of employment, the unemployment wage, what do we call that? The unemployment the unemployment, what's the term people use now? The unemployment rate. The stagnation of capital, the tendency of wages to the starvation point that exhibit themselves more and more strongly. Yes, minimum wages, I guess factories lying fallow. I don't know if that's the right term. Lying, not used. Sure seems like he is writing about things applicable to today, not simply things applicable to the 19th century. These things exhibit themselves more and more strongly as material progress goes on, to the fact that the land on which and from which all must live is made the exclusive property of some. We have seen that there is no possible remedy for these evils but the abolition of their cause. Yes, what is their cause? We have seen that private property in land has no warrant in justice, but stands condemned as the denial of natural right. A subversion of the law of nature that as social development goes on must condemn the masses of men to a slavery the hardest and most degrading. We have weighed every objection and seen that neither on the ground of equity or expediency is there anything to deter us from making land common property by confiscating rent. But a question of method remains. How shall we do it? I was just talking to a friend last night about how approximately in my area, in a nice suburb, half of the purchase price of a house, uh, and I always, these days, the Georgist in me says you're purchasing land and a house. Colloquially, we say, well, you buy a house, and we imply you're also buying the land. So the sale price of this piece of real estate approximately is half for land, half for the structure. And so if it were rented out, you could say that half of the rental price is for land access and half is for structure use. But let's read on, shall we? Um, we should satisfy the law of justice. We should meet all economic requirements by at one stroke abolishing all private titles, declaring all land public property, and letting it out to the highest bidders in lots to suit, under such conditions as would scarcely guard the private right to improvements. But going back to my house example, that is when you purchase the home. 1 year later, the structure will have, materially degraded as the water heater has worn out a bit, as the roof has worn out a bit, as the dishwasher has worn out a bit. However, the land will have increased in value. So at any point when you look at the sale price in this area, it tends to be maybe half and half, but as time goes on, uh, it is generally incrementing more and more towards land value. All right, George writes, thus we should secure in a more complex state of society the same equality of rights that in a ruder state were secured by equal partitions of the soil, and by giving the use of the land to whoever could procure the most from it, we should secure the greatest production. Such a plan, instead of being a wild, impracticable vagary, has, with the exception that he suggests compensation to the present holders of land, undoubtedly a careless concession of which he upon reflection would reconsider, been endorsed by no less eminent a thinker than Herbert Spencer. So Herbert Spencer, he's saying, has a solution, but he doesn't agree that I guess Herbert Spencer proposes a compensation to current landlords, and George says this is a careless concession. But he says he does have a solution that is not wild and it is not impractical vagary. Vagary in this case meaning vagueness or no, an unexpected and inexplicable change in a situation or in someone's behavior. I'm glad we looked that one up. All right, so what does Herbert Spencer propose? He says, such a doctrine is consistent with the highest state of civilization, may be carried out without involving a community of goods, and need cause no very serious revolution in existing arrangements. The change required would simply be a change of landlords. Separate ownership would merge into the joint stock ownership of the public. Instead of being in the possession of individuals, the country would be held by the great corporate body, society. Instead of leasing his acres from an isolated proprietor, the farmer would lease them from the nation. Instead of paying his rent to the agent of Sir John or his Grace, he would pay it to an agent or deputy agent of the community. Stewards would be public officials instead of private ones, and tenancy the only land tenure. Tenancy would be the only land tenure. This was just a weird way of starting. Such a doctrine is consistent. It's like, we today when we say such, we usually say that afterwards, after stating the thing. But he goes on. He does it backwards. And tenancy is the only land tenure. A state of things so ordered would be in perfect harmony with the moral law. Under it, all men would be equally landlords. All men would be alike free to become tenants. BBB. Clearly, therefore, maybe this is ... Clearly, therefore, on such a system, the earth might be enclosed, occupied, and cultivated in entire subordination to the law of equal freedom. I guess Herbert Spencer here does not talk about compensating present holders of land. He just simply says we shift the land ownership to the public, and that instead of paying rent to a landlord, you pay it to all of your friends and all of your community, which is supposedly what the Commonwealth is. George continues. But such a plan, though perfectly feasible, does not seem to me the best, or rather I propose to accomplish the same thing in a simpler, easier, and quieter way than that of formally confiscating all the land and formally letting it out to the highest bidders. To do that would involve a needless shock to present customs and habits of thought, which is to be avoided. To do that would involve a needless extension of governmental machinery, which is to be avoided. It is an axiom of statesmanship which the successful founders of tyranny have understood and acted upon that great changes can best be brought about under old forms. This is sort of where I'm struggling at nowadays, is how to bring about these great changes. And George is saying an axiom of statesmanship, the successful founders of tyranny, so we'll learn from them, is that it can best be brought about under old forms. I don't know. Revolution is so, like, when I'm dealing with really ugly code when I'm programming, revolution is so much more satisfying and clear to me when things have gotten really bad. Like when you just scrap it, do a big refactor. I don't know. Letting the government confiscate all land doesn't seem so horrible to me. But it is true, I am pretty scared of extension of governmental machinery. I would want to like, yeah, if like the United States were to, the government were to collapse, then whatever government then arises, I'd be like, okay, you can own all the land, and everyone rents it from you. Um, Whoever bids the highest, maybe you use a Vicray auction or the sealed blind auctions or whatever. Second highest is what the highest bidder wins and pays what the second highest bid was. These sorts of auctions. But I suppose, yeah, if we don't want to wait around for the American, well, I mean, if you were to just keep America, the United States in power, then I guess using the land value tax that George is about to propose is the smoothest way. And it is what I advocate for and talk about a lot. Um, so George writes, we who would be free men should heed the same truth that the founders of tyranny have understood. It is the natural method. When nature would make a higher type, she takes a lower one and develops it. This also is the law of social growth. Let us work by it. With the current, we may glide fast and far. Against it, it is hard pulling and slow progress. Yeah, if only we had a new continent to settle. I do not propose either to purchase or to confiscate private property in land. The first would be unjust. Yes, purchasing it would be in paying robbers. The second, confiscating it, he says, is needless. Let the individuals who now hold it still retain, if they want to, possession of what they are pleased to call their land. Let them continue to call it their land. Let them buy and sell and bequeath and devise it. We may safely leave them the shell if we take the kernel. This is quoted a lot in Georgist groups. We may safely leave them the shell if we take the kernel. It is not necessary to confiscate land. It is only necessary to confiscate bum 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 rent. Nor to take rent for public uses is it necessary that the state should bother with the letting of lands, and assume the chances of the favoritism, collusion, and corruption this might involve. Yeah, I was arguing this with some Georgists not too long ago, that if you do just nationalize all the land, you are um, more clearly at least risking a kind of corruption from governmental oversight issues or lack of oversight or bureaucracy and favoritism, collusion, and corruption. It is not necessary. Also, you risk negligence and just apathy that so frequently accompanies government bureaucracy. It is not necessary that any new machinery should be created. The machinery already exists. Instead of extending it, all we have to do is simplify and reduce it by leaving to landowners a percentage of rent which would probably be much less than the cost and loss involved in attempting to rent lands through state agency. And by making use of this existing machinery, we may without jar or shock assert the common right to land by taking rent for public uses. Yeah, like I live in this house with my dad and with Caesar. Um, he rents from us, and if we suddenly Redfin or Zillow, whatever, they say rent for this house is like 5,000 plus a little bit per month. If suddenly you made the state come in, take over the house, do an auction, we would probably bid the most because we don't want to have to move. We have all our stuff here, but maybe we wouldn't. I don't know if other people maybe really want to come and then we'd have to move. Uh, that is a lot of oversight, a lot of to, effort, especially all at once if the government had to do that with bazillion houses. If instead you looked at our, uh, market rental income, and I mean, it's ballpark when I'm saying it right now to say that it's 50-50 land versus house. You can see that instead of paying $5,200 that somebody would rent this house on this land for, which we currently own, they instead would, or we instead would pay about 2,500, maybe a little bit more, because it's like 5,200 is what I think the real estate website said rent was for this house. So 2,600 a month approximately would be our rent tax. And so, 2,600 times 12, it would be $31,200 a year, would be our yearly taxes. There would be no property taxes on top of this. There would be no income tax on top of this. And that would be what this household of three, adult working men would pay to live here. It is a big 5-bedroom, 2-bath house. And we are in a pretty nice suburb, but we are 30, 40 minutes outside of Los Angeles, where the land is a lot more valuable. Of course, if you weren't, this is also zoned for single family residential housing. You could definitely imagine this being more optimally used as a denser form of housing. I would be totally happy with that, especially if that meant we had fewer big roads, we lived in a more bicycle, walkable friendly neighborhood, we had nearer markets and entertainment, nightlife that I could walk to instead of drunk driving to. Not that I drunk drive, but everybody does. That is America. All right, this is enough of a tangent. We will resume what George says. So, yes, the machinery, yes. We may, without jar or shock, assert the common right to land by taking rent for public uses. We already take some rent in taxation. We have only to make some changes in our modes of taxation to take it all. What I therefore propose as the simple yet sovereign remedy, which will raise wages, increase the earnings of capital, extirpate pauperism, abolish poverty, give remunerative employment to whoever wishes it, afford free scope to human powers, lessen crime, elevate morals and taste and intelligence, purify government, and carry civilization to yet nobler heights, is to appropriate rent by taxation. Yeah, this is like the wild paragraph that I agree with. It will raise wages. It will increase capital earnings, which so many people think is like, I don't know, there's a lot of people who are very anti-capital, but capital is a good creation of human society that enables us to make more wealth faster. Having factories, having hammers, having computers, having the internet, an infrastructure, having power. It would extirpate pauperism, abolish poverty, and I think by poverty we're meaning this kind of desperate destitution sort of poverty. Remunerative employment, whoever wishes it, sort of citizen's dividend-ish. I'm not exactly sure what we mean by remunerative employment. Free scope to human powers, lessen crime, certainly. Elevate morals. This is his whole theory that being wealthy enables you to be more moral, more noble. Elevate taste. Hello, Scarlet Rob 555. What do you think of the idea of appropriating land rent by taxation. And purify government and carry civilization to yet nobler heights. No, we can't even imagine how noble might we become. In this way, the state may become the universal landlord without calling herself so, and without assuming a single new function. In form, the ownership of land would remain just as now. No owner of land need be dispossessed, and no restriction need be placed upon the amount of land anyone could hold. There is this one sort of tactical trade-off with the land value tax, which is sometimes you hear people propose the land value tax, and it doesn't sound revolutionary. It doesn't sound like utterly holistically a just or something, or like foundational to society. It just sounds like sort of an obscure, weird tax law. And especially when a lot of sort of nerdy economist types describe it. Um, Aha, Scarlet Rob 55, you just want me to pay you for illustrations. No, thank you. I have I have no interest in that. Uh, for rent being taken by the state and taxes, land, no matter in whose name it stood or in what parcels it was held, would be really common property, and every member of the community would participate in the advantages of its ownership. Now, insomuch as the taxation of rent or land values must necessarily be increased, just as we abolish other taxes, we may put the proposition into practical form by proposing to abolish all taxation save that upon land values, the single land value tax. Ooh rah rah. Now, that may sound wild to a modern ear, because assuredly our government does way more now than it did in George's time. And if you really think that you don't want to give up all those things, um, then I guess you would be willing to pay other taxes to accumulate more income for the government. I would just mention a few ideas. One is that there's at core, all taxes come of rent. So yeah, George doesn't discuss this in Progress and Poverty, and it's sort of a math nerdy thing. But you can sort of think that, if you raise an income tax, um, in some sense, the landlords can offset that by raising taxes on their renters, um, so long as like it doesn't get to the subsistence level, um, or I mean go below the subsistence level. Um, I don't know. So you can Google that in your own time. The other just empirical thing is that you know, there is this funny thing that the government sort of tends to always gather the same percentage of gross domestic product. When they raise taxes more, less is produced. So while they gain more of what is produced because less is produced, it's about as much as if they had taxed at a lower rate and more had been produced. And this is like there's a graph that shows this that I saw not too long ago from a reputable source that I don't remember. You can Google for this too, I guess. What is it called? Maybe we spend some time looking at this. Law of, not rent, but does government taxes always, graph of government um, gross tax income. by year. Government always gets same share of GDP regardless of tax rate. Hauser's law is the empirical observation that in the United States, federal tax revenues since World War II have always been approximately equal to 19.5% of GDP, regardless of wide fluctuations in the marginal tax rate. Historically, since the end of World War II, federal tax receipts as a percentage of gross domestic product averaged 17.9%. Yeah, this is that idea. And so this is what sometimes fuels the techno-optimists saying that all that matters is more production. But the problem with just more production, right? How do I explain it? You could have, you could have, you know, poor people, rich people, and then so, and then so like the total is, you know, this much together, and then GDP takes 20% of that. And then you could have progress where poor people continue making this much and rich people make this much. So GDP is now this much. This is GDP over here. And then the government takes 20% of that. And you look at this. This is the techno-optimist problem. This is progress. It is true. Techno-optimists do cause progress. But the poor people, they're still poor. This is poor. Poor. Still poor. I'm drawing some really good visuals here if you're only listening. So this is why, and that was when I first saw this posted by Jonathan Blow and talking about this, that's where I first heard of this idea. And he was talking about, all that matters, all that matters is growing GDP. And I don't agree that all that matters is growing GDP. What matters is justice, and then justice, I think, will allow GDP to grow. I think it would grow even faster than just a techno-optimist getting free reign to do whatever they want and having low taxes. Anyway, all right, where were we? Yes, abolish all taxation save that upon land value taxes. I mentioned Atcor, and I talked about Hauser's law. All right, we're going to finish this. As we have seen, the value of land is at the beginning of society nothing. But as society develops by the increase of population and the advance of the arts, it becomes greater and greater. In every civilized country, even the newest, the value of the land taken as a whole is sufficient to bear the entire expenses of government. In the better developed countries, it is much more than sufficient. Hence, it will not be enough merely to place all taxes upon the value of land. It will be necessary, where rent exceeds the present governmental revenues, commensurately to increase the amount demanded in taxation, and to continue this increase as society progresses and rent advances. Okay, hence it will not be to place all taxes upon the value of land. It will be necessary, where rent exceeds the present government's revenue, commensurately to increase the amount demanded and to continue this increase. Yes, the land tax, the gross amount that is, yeah, it should go up as land value goes up. But this is so natural and easy a matter that it may be considered as involved, or at least understood, in the proposition to put all taxes on the value of land. Yeah, if land value goes up, the land tax should take in more. I mean, if it's a percentage, it's a percentage. But anyway. Well, I guess, yeah. You can't simply say, look at a piece of property and say, all right, the land here is worth 50% of the sale price, and that it will always be so. Over time, the land might become 60% or 70% of the sale price. So you have to think about that. It also might go down, but that's wouldn't be a generalized thing if society in general is progressing. When oh, where did I? Yes. That is the first step upon which the practical struggle must be made. When the hare is once caught and killed, cooking him will follow as a matter of course. When the common right to land is so far appreciated that all taxes are abolished, save those which fall upon rent, there is no danger of much more than is necessary to induce them to collect the public revenues being left to individual landholders. Okay, long sentence yet again. The common right to land is so far appreciated that all taxes are abolished. Um, we save those which, so yes, the single land tax. There's no more danger of any much more necessary to induce them to collect the public revenues being left to individual landholders. Um, Alright, so when this is done, there's no danger of much more than is necessary to induce them to collect the public revenues being left. I don't know. I don't understand that sentence. Experience has taught me, for I have been for some years endeavoring to popularize this proposition. Yes, he had been writing for a while at this point. Wherever the idea of concentrating all taxation upon land values finds lodgment sufficient to induce consideration, all right, so wherever this gets popular, it invariably makes way, but there are few of the classes most to be benefited by it, who at first, or even for a long time afterward, see its full significance and power. Okay. It is difficult for working men to get over the idea that there is a real antagonism between capital and labor. Yes, we see this all the time. Whenever I'm talking to anyone very left-leaning or even explicitly socialist, they want to fight capital. It is difficult for small farmers, and this is so for small farmers and homestead owners to get over the idea that to put all taxes on the value of land would be to unduly tax them. Yes, all the rural people who own a bunch of land out in nowhere, they're like, oh, a land tax, I would get screwed. But that's not true, because owning 1,000 acres out in the middle of nowhere is not going to be taxed even nearly as much as, like, I don't know, 1 or 2 acres in the downtown area. It is difficult for both classes to get over the idea that to exempt capital from taxation would be to make the rich richer and the poor poorer. Yes, this is very hard for people to think that we should not have a capital gains tax. These I mean, also a bunch of way there are like so there's a whole industry about dodging the capital gains tax anyway. So wasteful. These ideas spring from confused thought. But behind ignorance and prejudice, there is a powerful interest which has hitherto dominated literature, education, and opinion. A great wrong always dies hard, and the great wrong which in every civilized country condemns the masses of men to poverty and want will not die without a bitter struggle. I do not think the ideas of which I speak can be entertained by the reader who has followed me thus far. But inasmuch as any popular discussion must deal with the concrete rather than the abstract, let me ask him to follow me somewhat further, that we may try the remedy I have proposed by the accepted canons of taxation. In doing so, many incidental bearings may be seen that otherwise might escape notice. Yeah, so George says you may not be entertained by this quite yet. But he wants to go farther. All right. That's it. Oh, I wanted to also mention that in my little hypothetical of my house with the three of us here working, uh, I am working on a video game, haven't and don't have any income to speak of at the moment. Caesar works like part-time minimum wage jobs, and my dad is a half-retired doctor. And so, under George's world, you would assume not only would them not have to pay an income tax, but you would also assume both wages would go up significantly, especially the minimum wage position. Actually, the doctor position, I'm not sure. It depends on if we maintain an artificial scarcity of doctors, which inflates their current wages anyway, because we don't let we don't let the creation of doctors actually be a market determined thing. And then there is a George's question over how to treat the arts and copyright and that kind of thing, and how, if my game is at all successful, how much money I would make off of that. I don't know. Um, but it sure seems like paying 30-ish, 32,000-ish dollars a year in total taxes for owning this plot of land in this part of the world um, does not seem improper. Uh, oh, right, and you'd also abolish like sales taxes. So all the things that we buy over the course of the year. Anyway, ending the recording. Like, subscribe, share, think about, tell me if you agree, tell me if you disagree. Bye bye. hgdd 83. Oh, I have it there. The land value tax lets us take the kernel while leaving the shell. It is the capture of rent rather than the actual capture of land that provides justice to a society. This chapter is a land value tax would solve that. This is the money. Oh yeah, baby girl. New episode. I got a new attitude.